Welcome to ASG. In today's tutorial I'm going to walk through how to use Astro Pixel Processor and create mosaic images with their stacking software. And so I've got several examples here that I'll walk through, and because stacking images can be quite a long process, I'll pause the video when the long processes occur. So let me jump through real quick and just show you what we're going to work on and what we have so far. If you've never done mosaics, they're a very interesting way of creating a large scale image using whatever scope you have, and you can tile and take different quadrants of the sky, and your stacking software will process them and stitch them together as long as you have some overlapping of stars in your images. And so you can see in this image I've done a 2 by 2, so I've got two quadrants on the top, two quadrants on the bottom, and I've taken about 120 images, not a lot of data, but it was about 7 hours worth of data across these four quadrants, and I took it in hydrogen alpha, oxygen 3, sulfur 2, narrowband images, which is pretty common. So that's going to be my example, and we're going to create this in Astro Pixel Processor. Now, if you've never done mosaics, just to give you a quick guide on how I do it, I use Stellarium. I like Stellarium over, say, Sky Safari for my planning, because you can actually load up your own backgrounds in your neighborhood, so I can actually see what I see in my yard. And so here I've got, I'm going to zoom in, this is the North America Nebula, which is the example we'll look at here. And I like to use Stellarium because I can actually put in my sensor here and turn it on and off. I can also switch it. For example, I want to make my sensor at a 90 degree because that's what I am taking my images at. So now I'm kind of at a landscape mode. Now what I do is I use this to plan, and I come in here and I set up where I want my targets. And this is very similar to what I did. I took several images here in this quadrant, and then I move over to this section and I make sure that I've got about a 10% overlap of my images. And then I move down to this quadrant. Again, I've got overlap on the top here, and I've got overlap on the side. And so what I'll do is go through and I'll actually pick quadrants and stars, and I will grab the right ascension and declination so that I know exactly what to type in my software that I use to capture. So this is how I plan mosaic, and you may do many more panels. You could do 8 by 8s, you could do big sections all over this place. It's a very cool feature to be able to do this. And Astro Pixel Processor, if we look at this example, I've already ran this through just to give you an idea of what we're going to do, and it's already stitched these together. Now you can see I don't have a lot of data, and if you zoomed in you can kind of see the different gradients across these areas, but it's very, very well done with their tools, and I'll show you a couple of their settings to blend those together. This is an example, is the same images but not blended, and this is what you would normally see in a lot of stacking software, which you can see there's no blending between your frames even though they're overlapping. They've registered correctly, they've stacked correctly, but they just don't put your image together well, and this can be a lot of work in Photoshop to try to correct. So having a good stacking piece of software that does this for you just makes your life really, really easy. And here's again the stacked one that's been completely blended and normalized, and this is the one that is just a typical stack with no blending. So Astro Pixel Processor really excels in this area. So let me show you how to do that real quick. And because I've got a lot of light frames and I know people don't like to watch long videos, I'm going to kind of jump through this step, and I will pause the video every time I do a long process. So let's just start off with Astro Pixel Processor. I'm assuming you probably have a basic understanding of it. You're going to load up your lights, and I loaded up my flats, masters, darks, and you can see here I have all of my hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and then I have my flats bias, my calibration files down here. So I will assume you've done maybe some of these already at this point. So let's jump over and calibrate. Use the same steps to do this. We're going to go ahead and go through, and I'm just going to go ahead and assign the different masters to all my lights. That's always a quick process, and you can see it put all of my master darks, flats, biases, and my calibration, my bad pixel map, all of it is tied into my files. So we can go to step 3, and this is going to take a long time. It's going to analyze the stars. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this as this does this step, and I'll jump back here in a sec. Okay, I got finished here running the analyzing of the stars. That takes a while. That took about maybe, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 minutes here to run through because I've got 120 images. You can speed that up by making sure you're down here on the analyzed star size. I think 500 is as low as you can go though. So let's jump over here to step 4. Again, we're going to be doing a mosaic, so there's a couple settings at this point on step 4 that we'll want to adjust. Now, first one is, and the nice thing about Astro Pixel Processor is it tells you that the errors are there if you just try to go down here and just start registration. The first one is registration mode, and that, of course, we're going to go from normal to mosaic. Now, if you just hit start, it will actually show you what you're missing. And the first one is, are you taking with the same camera and optics? If not, it wants you to change some of these other settings, including, let me cancel here, cancel. It wants you to use dynamic distortion correction if you're not. And that can be the case if you're loading up, say, a previously stacked image set with some new data. You'll want to turn that setting on. The other error that's going to pop up is about your scale stop, and so if I leave that off, I'll start the registration. It'll say, are you using the same optics? No, I don't want to disable that. It's going to say on the scale stop section here, do you have about 10% overlapping? I don't really go through and calculate what percentage I have, so you want to increase this usually to about 10 because there's another setting. So I leave it with what they're recommending, and I say yes, I want to increase that, and it's going to go ahead and go through there and start. And the scale stop is right here. It's normally set at 5. You can play with these settings and see what your output is. I've always felt that one works pretty good as default. So again, register setting here on number 4, you're going to increase the scale stop. You're also going to make sure you have dynamic distortion correction turned on, and then you can start the registration process. So it's going to go through all of my images here. I'll go ahead and pause it again while it does this process. It's a little bit quicker though. Okay, so we finished up with the registration process here. That actually took a little longer than I thought. That was about a 20-minute process on my computer with 120 lights being registered. Again, the key steps in there being setting it to mosaic mode. And APP will pretty much pick up and give you any errors you need. So that's step 4. Step 5, we're going to normalize everything, and this step is nice. I like to neutralize the background on here, so if this is unchecked, make sure you check that. So I'm going to go ahead and process that and start it. I'm not sure how long this is going to take in step 5, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this and we'll jump back in here when it finishes. Okay, we got that finished. The process of normalizing for 120 frames here took about maybe 5 minutes or so. Pretty quick process. Again, we're doing this mosaic, so we're going to jump to step 6, and this is where we're going to also do a few settings specific to mosaics. So at this point we've only done a couple of changes. One of them was back in step 4. We made sure to turn on mosaic mode here, and now we're all the way to the end on step 6. So you get to pick which frames you really want. At this point, you've probably thumbed through all of your images to kind of see, is it a good one? Are you going to kick it out? Are you going to right click and you can delete them or remove them from the list? At this point, I usually like to delete bad ones, so if I run the data again, I just know all my images are good. Here is where Astro Pixel Processor really excels. So I know we've taken a long time to get here, but they have two real key things that change. One of them is called local normalization correction, and you can do it in various degrees. I always do just the first one, and it's turned out really good. I've tried and tested several others as you increase, and I just haven't got nearly as good a results or very negligible results with it. I think maybe if you take a lot of data with different camera and optics, it might be worth running more. You can also see how many iterations you want it to run over your data, and I've always done the default. I've tested some of the other ones. I just don't see a lot of results for what you get, and it just takes extra time to run through those. So they've done a good job in here, and if you roll over these, it'll actually walk you through that hey, start out with first degree and run 3 iterations of it. That's typically a good starting point, and I've found that to be true as well. The one thing I do also change is this one, which is multi-band blending, and this is going to blend those quadrants really well if you enable this. In mosaic mode, we do want this on, and you can play around with this. I usually get good results in that 8, 9, 10 range, because that's where our scale stop was back on the other one. This does not mean that I have exactly 10% overlap. I may have 15, I may have less. So this is a good one to experiment. You try 5, try 10, and try 15 and see where you get in terms of blending and if you see the results that you want. So these two are critical if you're doing the mosaic mode, and it really turns on the powerful features that the system does. So LNC first degree, run it 3 times. Also turn on multi-band blending. The other stuff on here, again, you can play with this stuff. It doesn't really have anything to do with the mosaic modes, but more of just general calibrations of what you want to do in terms of your data. So those are the only 2 settings I turn on step 6, and we'll go ahead and hit integrate. Give it a name, and I'm going to let this run. This is going to take a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'll come back and talk about what the results look like. Okay, so welcome back. We got finished with running all of our integrations for our channels. Of course, Astro Pixel Processor has a really nice way of kicking out all 3 stacks, and I can open them up here. This is my hydrogen alpha stack, and of all 120 various frames, I think maybe 50 of those were hydrogen alpha. And with APP, it's nice. You can come over here and do some simple stretching, and you can see exactly what your data looks like right out of the gate. This is a great way to look over what it did. I like to increase this when I'm viewing these mosaics, especially in monochrome, and you can really zoom in and see if that multi-band blending did its job. And you can see there is just nothing, and this isn't very much data either, but there is just no lines through here. It really normalized that data really well. You can see, my images are not aligned perfect and turned perfect, but the framing could be a little bit better, but it definitely works and stitched them together very well for the amount of low data I have. We can open up the sulfur channel here. And this is a little bit darker, but again, you can zoom in and see that there's just no point of really telling where these things separated. So at this point, once you feel like you've got three good images, I like to jump over to their tools and use the combined RGB tool. And I'm just going to go ahead and add these three channels. There we go. So I'm going to add my hydrogen. I like APP, it automatically picks up which channel you think this is, which is hydrogen. I'll go ahead and add oxygen. And right now I'm just adding the channels. We'll worry about what color palette we'll use here in a second. So I've got all three added here. And that's my sulfur channel. So there's my three. You can come in here and pick your popular palettes. Let's just do HSO. You hit new formula and recalculate, and it's going to combine those three stacks now for your mosaic. And there you have it. And you'll notice in RGB you will start to see a little bit of differentiation in terms of where things might be, different colored backgrounds, and a lot of this is maybe just due to the fact that I have very low images, but I like to be able to flip through the palettes too. I'm going to flip it over to Hubble color palette, hit new formula, and all that does is change the RGB channels of which your hydrogen, alpha, and your sulfur and oxygen go to. So Hubble always turns out a little bit more green, and that's the one I like to use. So they have a feature over here on the right too to neutralize the background. You can click on that. It will run through and do a neutralization on the RGB palette here, but it really won't do much because we've done that back in our steps when we were stacking the images. So these are already normalized and neutralized, so you probably won't see much effect there. And at this point, if you're happy with your RGB color, you can go ahead and save this, and you can kick it out as I'll just leave the name. You can kick it out as a TIFF file if you want to get it into Photoshop or something else at this point, and you pretty much have your stack completed. At this point, I would take this over and put into Photoshop, and that's where we were at the beginning. This is our Photoshop stack. At this point, we're really ready to do the things that we want to do with a mosaic of this kind. So, I always crop them. Let me show you an example here. Let's see. Here's a cropped image of what I would do first. So I've taken let me go ahead and stop and close down APP at this point. It's kind of slowing my computer down. It's all done. This is where I've taken this image and I've cropped it, and I've done a really simple stretch on it just to kind of touch up the data how I like it. And then at this point I would run it through something like StarNet and remove the stars or use it to separate the stars. That way I can get a layer of stars and then a layer of nebula, and then I would go ahead and start producing that however I wanted to start in the processing. So here's an example of a finished image that was done. This is that image. You can see I've ran through and did some more color palette stuff to it for the Hubble piece and just kind of brought out those tones. But the ability to stack this is pretty amazing in Astro Pixel Processor. So if you've wanted to do mosaics, it's pretty much the same flow. I really just stop on step 4 and step 6, and that's where I make sure I set up those 2 extra settings. Other than that, you stitch them all together and it does a really good job. So hopefully that's helpful. I do have another video if you've ever wanted to compare Deep Sky Stacker versus Astro Pixel Processor. I'm a big fan of APP, so you can see that comparison on our website as well as those other videos. So we'll see you there. Thanks.